longevity and what type of humans live longer and how do you live longer as a human. And so there's been a lot of nutrition studies, a lot of environmental studies. There's a lot of that going on. There's even a special on Netflix. I think it's called the Blue Zones around the world where people typically live longer. And so there's a lot of energy being trying to figure out how we can live longer, live into our 100s, and if that's the sort of thing that you want to do. I think one of the difficulties is that everyone is built a little bit differently, and so, like what helps one person live longer may not help another person live longer, and there's a lot of genetics into this, and environment, and culture, and all of that, so it's really hard to find strong correlations, and there was a study that wrapped up last year that studied long-lived people all over the world and tried to find out if there were any positive correlations between those who live long of differing people, all right? So, like, you have a group in Japan that lives very long. You have a group in Africa that lives very long. You have different groups in Eastern Europe that might live long, and they all have different diets and stuff. And so, like, what are the common correlations? And this particular study found one definitive, almost irrefutable, at least in their study, correlation of those who live long. And it's those who have good relationships. People who have healthy, meaningful, long-term relationships tend to live longer, all right? At least according to this study, which I thought was interesting. There's another book that I read recently it's a study of emotion and spirituality in the Bible. And one of the things that the author references, the author's a psychiatrist, but one of the things he references is that something happens neurologically when you have a healthy relationship with someone else. And he goes, there are, this long-term neurological study is now showing that the body, when you have healthy relationships, the body can actually heal itself neurologically. All right, and he goes, but it's in a very specific encounter, at least that they have found. And it's this, and we've probably all seen it before. If you see two people who very much care about one another, and you look at them talking with one another, especially if they're sitting across the table from one another, all right? And this is two people with a healthy relationship. One of them will begin to lean forward as they're talking, and unconsciously, the other person begins to lean forward as well, all right? One person begins to smile, and it doesn't even have to be at something funny. It's actually important that it's not funny. It's just that they begin to smile. And then the other person's face also then begins to smile, and they call this mirroring, all right? And this happens in the two important contexts. One, that you're in close proximity to the person physically, all right, and that you're looking at each other's eyes, all right? That's one of them. And the other one is that there's safety within the relationship. There's demonstrable safety in the relationship. And when that mirroring activity begins to happen, the body begins to heal neurologically. All right? In these very specific, I'm not a doctor. I'm not making this up either. I did read this. But this unconscious mirroring actually physically heals the human body. When two people are like this, then it has been demonstrated that physical, biological differences within us begin to take place. Woven relationships form us. They help us to have fulfilling lives. Last week we examined how important the community culture is in which attraction, romance, affection, and companionship comes to fruition in a relationship that leads to marriage, okay? So much of what we discussed 2 weeks ago was grounded in the notion that the way that we build these relationships at the outset largely determines the result of those relationships later in marriage. If we lack Christ-centeredness, selflessness, self-control, and community focus at the outset of our relationship, we are building a family and a marriage later on that oftentimes is not healthy. Thus, we have to build a faith culture that helps build these healthy dating relationships from the outset. That's what we discussed 2 weeks ago. Today, we're going to examine the marriage and family relationships that evolve over time, that become so important in forming us. But I do want to state something from the beginning, okay? Whether you had a super healthy dating relationship, one that was Christ-centered and selfless and under self-control, and are really struggling in your marriage now, okay? Or if you didn't have a great dating relationship and you got married and that marriage is unhealthy right now, whether both those things are true, I want to say at this moment that there is no reason to ever lose hope, even if it's been decades of fighting, of contempt, and of discontent. The same goes for the family relationships between siblings, between parents and kids, and long-term friendships even. There is no hurt and there is no history that cannot heal. There is so much reason to have hope. Open up your Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 16. But before we begin this, we need to talk about something theologically. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me for a second, because we are talking about relationships, but we need to ground this in a really, really important theological concept. You guys with me? In order to discuss the formation and the becoming that happens within marriage and family, it's important to understand how God has frameworked his relationship to his people, okay? Because he is the model for how we need to think about our own relationships, all right? To begin with, in the Old Testament, the covenant people were often described as God's bride. All right, that happens multiple times throughout Scripture. All right, for instance, Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 6, this is one of the more intimate portraits of that reality. In verse 6 of chapter 16, it says, "Then I passed by and saw you kicking about in your blood. As you lay in your blood, I said to you, live. I made you grow like a plant of the field. You grew and developed and entered puberty. Your breasts had formed and your hair had grown and you were stark naked. Later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine." That's an almost uncomfortable portrait of the intimacy that God describes that he has between himself and his people. All right? And it from the very beginning of the relationship all the way up to a covenant marriage. And he describes the relationship that he has with his covenant people as a marriage, okay, as a covenant marriage. Now, when we get to the New Testament, the church, in turn, then is described as Christ's bride. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, it says this, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any blemish, but holy and blameless." So here, the church is described as Jesus' bride. All right, so in both instances, throughout the entire meta-narrative of Scripture, God, Jesus, is describing the community, his people, as his wife, as his bride. Now, I don't believe that this is just poetic allegory to describe God's love from a different kind of point of view. There is a real binding relationship in marriage. It's not just affection between people. It's not just love, it's not just attraction. There is a bond that is created because of covenant, okay? And that is the point of this. It's a binding relationship between God's people and God, also between Christ and the church. Marriage is a covenant relationship, and that is the entirety of the point that God is making. And we understand the marriage relationship, and that makes it easier then for us to understand what God has to do in any relationship that he has with individuals or with the community. The thing is that God was always going to be faithful to this covenant. There was never a doubt about it. All right, from the covenant of the Old Testament to the New Testament, New Covenant, God was always going to be faithful. Amen. And in turn, we were always going to fail. We were bound to fail in this covenant agreement that we made with God. And that is a problem. What do you do with the relationship that is bound to fail? Now, people typically give up. They walk away. They say it's too hard. They look for something else that is more fulfilling. But that has never been God's way, ever. It is also not the way he wants us to be either. So then how do we overcome the failure of relationship? How did God overcome the failure of relationship? You know, in one stunning comparison, God tells the prophet Hosea to marry an unfaithful woman. It's this incredible story that takes place in Hosea chapter 3. And so he tells Hosea to go marry a woman named Gomer. It's an unfortunate name, but that's who it was. All right? And here's the thing. Hosea falls in love with this woman. Hosea loves this woman intensely. But she was a woman that was bound to fail in their relationship. And she does. And she fails horribly. It gets so bad that she sells herself out as a prostitute. All right? The whole point was for Hosea and for the rest of Israel to understand what it is for God to exist in a covenant relationship with us. But that wasn't the whole story. In Hosea chapter 3, verse 1, it says this, "The Lord said to me, now go show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. Then I told her, you are to live with me many days. You are not to be a prostitute or be intimate with any other man, and I will behave the same towards you. For the Israelites will live many days without a king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or household gods. Afterward, the Israelites will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They will come trembling to the Lord, to his blessings in the last days." So in the end, this is the whole point. In order for God to exist in a relationship with his people, he had to make an establishment in that relationship called grace. He had to live gracefully in order to remain in a relationship with us. Failure was always imminent for us. But God did not want to destroy the relationship on account of our own failures. So he had to introduce this element of grace into the covenant bond. Go ahead and open your Bibles to Exodus chapter 34, all right? We're almost done with the theological part of this fraction of a second sermon today. We see this with Moses, okay? At one point, the people are unfaithful to God. He's just brought them out of slavery. He saved them from Pharaoh. He's done miraculous signs, and they have been unfaithful to God. And God tells Moses, I am done with these people. I'm going to start all over with you. I'm going to start a new people starting with you. All right? And Moses pleads to God, please don't do this. All right? And this marks a turning point in the way that God now is going to function with his people, all right? And we see this in Exodus 34. So right after he was going to destroy the people, all right, and this is the whole point of the interaction between God and Moses, we get to verse 6 of chapter 34. And he, God, passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children and the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. So right after their deserved destruction, God says the only way, basically this is what's happening, the only way for me to exist for you is for me to be gracious with you. Is for me to be slow to anger and compassionate, and that is what I will be from now on, so that we can maintain this covenant relationship. That is the new development in the Bible at that point. Essentially, God is telling the people the only way for this covenant bond to work is for me to introduce grace. Where there are human relationships, grace must abound, or the bond will fail. So grace is what God introduced in order to save relationships. And it is also what we have to have in abundance in our daily relationships with one another. All right, we're going to stay the rest of the time in Ephesians chapter 5, so we'll turn to Ephesians 5. You know, one of the most common elements that emerges, now we're going to turn to the problem of human relationships. All right, so we know that the foundation of God being able to have a relationship with us is grace, okay? Now, as we turn to human relationships, we have to examine what are some of the problems. All right, one of the most common elements that emerges within long-term relationships like marriage or family is resentment and bitterness. And these are some of the dangerous ingredients to undermine our ability to enjoy, love, and honor our relationships. When you have, if you are, this often happens in families. When you become 14, 15, maybe 12 or 13, you begin to move from childhood into adulthood. And when that happens, you also begin to experience some of your parents' flaws for the first time. Whereas before, you may not have noticed them. Now you are starting to they're starting to come into focus. All right? And you're starting to see, those were always there. All right? And this can affect kids in a lot of ways. All right? It can make you angry. It can make you irritated with your family. All right? There's a lot of things that start to develop. But one of the things that starts to happen is that you start to resent your family. All right? The same thing happens in marriage. When you're dating, when you're getting married, you see no fault in the person that you love. Like all of the little quirks, you think these are just so adorable, these little things. I'm never going to get tired of this. And you even say to yourself, as you see you'll go to a restaurant, okay, and you and your boyfriend or girlfriend or your young bride or you're sitting there and you're just talking back and forth the whole dinner. There's no silence. There's nothing. There's just conversation. And you look over and there's like a 45-year-old, the couple that's 45, and they're just eating their food in silence. And you can hear their fork scraping against the plate and they're not talking at all. And you go, we'll never be like that. We'll always communicate. But over time, you get to know each other intimately. And you get to know the worst parts of one another. And you hurt one another. All right? Because we're all so fallible, we cannot help but hurt the people that we love the most. And if the people that we love the most are the people we spend the most time with, then they're the people that we hurt the most. So we hurt our children. We hurt our spouses. We hurt our siblings. We hurt our parents. And this creates a bitterness within us. It creates resentment within us. And this starts to distance us from one another. We start to expect to be hurt. And these cycles of expectations of hurt and cynicism in the relationship, it begins to build, and now you have contempt. And after a while, you start asking yourself the question, why am I in this relationship? Children want to leave home and never come back. Parents want to escape to the garage to do, work on their cars or to go on trips and get away. All right, all of this begins to emerge, and none of it is healthy. Ephesians 4, verse 29 says this: "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as it fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you." Paul uses this language of being full of grace oftentimes in his letters. In Colossians 4:6, he says, "Let your conversations always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." The concept of giving grace as a usual practice within our relationships is crucial to long and fulfilling marriages, family relationships. But what does it mean to give grace? What is Paul talking about when he says to be gracious? Grace literally means to show favor to give blessings to. It's like, you ever talk to someone, and when you talk to that person, you feel like, wow, this person really likes me. Like, I don't even know them, but they're so interested in everything I say. And you walk away feeling more lighthearted than when you began. All right? That is, you've just experienced favor. You've just experienced grace in that. And to Paul, okay, this is what's interesting. To Paul, a person's heart is very intimately connected to their mouth. All right? What you say is absolutely what's going on in your heart. That's why sometimes in marriages or in any relationship, you need to guard what you say. You really need to guard what you say. Sometimes we say the most horrible things to one another, things we know that we don't mean, but we're trying to hurt the other person, so we say it out loud. And here's the thing, you can never, ever, ever take it back. That person heard that come out of your mouth. that is now in their mind and heart. All right? And the reality is, it came out of your mouth because somewhere it's in your heart. All right? To Paul, a person's heart and mouth are very connected. What we say and how we say it reveals a lot about who we are on the inside. Even saying a good thing, even saying a right thing the wrong way betrays the evil in our hearts. You can be right and wrong all at the same time. And this is something very important to our relationships. Is it okay to be right but without grace? Marriage and family is the fertile ground for many things to grow. The idea is that over time, trust becomes so deep within these relationships that some of the questions you may have had early on, you no longer have. It's funny, trusting relationships can execute insecurity. Isn't that interesting? Like, you can have an insecure person who's maybe suffered from crippling insecurity, but they enter into a long-term relationship that is trustworthy, and over time, that begins to execute the insecurity on the inside. All right? So relationships can be a place where trust grows, respect grows, admiration, but there's other things that can grow that are more insidious. Things like resentment and bitterness. Okay? And I think, I think we can define bitterness as like a settled hostility that poisons the inner self. All right? Bitterness and anger are different. All right? Anger can flare up at any moment. All right? Liverpool's playing right now, by the way. And if they win today, they win the entire English Premier League, all right, which is amazing. And it's amazing how I could be so happy to watch the game and then within seconds be so irate watching the game. All right? That is anger, okay? That's different from bitterness. Bitterness is something much more insidious. It is something much more hidden. It's often a word associated with bitter plants, which are often types of plants that have unusually deep roots. In the end, we could boil down the verse that we read in Ephesians 4:29 to this: be gracious and eliminate bitterness. Some of the common origins of bitterness is actual injury. All right, it's not usually perceived injury, it's actual hurt. This is where bitterness begins. When someone that you love, someone that you thought you trusted, someone who you're close to legitimately wounds you, okay, actually hurts you. And at that point, it's this conscious feeling. We know when we're hurt, all right? When someone hurts us, we feel it deeply, okay? And we all deal with that differently. And here's the thing. If you deal with that wound, if you resolve that wound, if you forgive that wound, it goes away. It actually heals. But if you don't fully deal with that wound, it goes underground. And it starts to bury itself within you, and it becomes bitterness. All right? It becomes an unconscious thing within you, not something that you can identify at a given moment. This is why it's dangerous. Bitterness is always ready to manifest, but it's usually hidden. All right? It infects us with wrath. Furthermore, it becomes rooted. It becomes something that's hard to remove. Once you have bitterness within you, my wife points this out sometimes. Everybody says, well, I'm not bitter, okay? Like I'm not bitter at them, but this is the 12th time you've brought it up. All right? If you brought it up more than once, you are bitter. All right? You can make your words sound like you're not bitter, but you are bitter. All right? You are, for lack of a better term, infected. There is now something in you that is rooted in you. All right? And here's the thing about bitterness. Bitterness takes normal disagreements and it turns them into full-blown wrath feuds. All right? Like, this is the type of thing where you're driving, like you and your loved one, you're in a car, you're driving to the mall, and they say, hey, why don't you take that parking space there? And you lose your mind all of a sudden. Why are you always telling me where to park? Why? Let me just park the car. I don't want your advice. And the other person's like, whoa, what the heck? All right? That's because there's something inside of you. You guys, I see spouses pointing to one another right now. All right? That's not because you have deep feelings about parking, okay? That's because whatever that conversation was just touched upon an infection. Something deep inside of you. All right? And that's the danger of bitterness. It's elusive. It's hard to kill. It pops up in seemingly unrelated areas like a parking space. All right? And then, what happens when you react in something that has nothing to do with the bitterness? Well, you get discipled in that thing. I think you need to take some driving anger courses, is what I think. All right? And that's not the issue at all. That has nothing to do with anything. All right? This is just popping up from some wound that's like 4 miles that way. But the roots are all over the place now, and anytime you touch upon it, it starts to come. You guys understand what I'm saying? All right? Bitterness destroys relationships. All right? And bitterness is very, very hard to get rid of. But there is one surefire way to get rid of bitterness, and that's the application of grace. In order to be consistently refreshed in marriage, in family, as a husband, as a wife, as a teenager with parents, as parents with teenagers, you have to have a conviction that these relationships require grace. Requires grace consistently applied. A healthy relationship requires two people who give grace. A marriage requires two people who easily give grace. Now, I don't know if there's such a thing as reluctantly giving grace. I actually think that's probably not possible. If you're reluctant, then you're not giving grace. All right, you're putting on some sort of show. You're fulfilling an obligation, and that's not actually grace at that point. Arguably, more than any other relationship, marriage and family needs grace because we know each other. We've seen all the worst parts of one another. We've experienced all the worst parts of one another. Grace is the supernatural ingredient that makes these relationships strong over the course of decades. And yet, it's funny how these relationships are the ones we often give the least grace to. Like you could be in a store with the one that you love, whether it's your child, your parent, your spouse, all right? And you ever been like somewhere with someone, you're kind of walking together, and then you kind of stop for a second, and then they run into you, because they're not paying attention, and you're not paying attention. And if it's someone that you love deeply, for whatever reason, you're more deeply annoyed with that little thing than anything. You're like, what are you doing? Like, why can't you just watch where you're going? Like, why do you have to run into me? Like, do you not care about me? It's weird. We do these weird things. All right? You running into me accidentally means you're not paying attention. So you just don't pay attention to anything. All right? But then you could 5 seconds later, a stranger who you've never met in your life, do exactly the same thing. And what's your reaction? I am so sorry. That is totally my fault. I should have been paying attention to what I was doing. You ran into me, but that's my fault that you ran into me. We'll do that to a stranger, but we won't do that with the people that we most love. All right? These are the moments where we have to get into the habit of intentionally giving grace, of letting go quickly, giving grace in the mundane activities of life, and not withholding it from one another. And the thing is that when you do that, when you give grace like that, it's not like, here's what I would imagine, all right? They run into you. I'm giving these really stupid, mundane examples. I'm sorry, but I'm sticking with them, okay? You're in a store. They run into you. You go, honey, I'm sorry. They may go, yeah, well, why don't you watch what you're doing, okay? All right, so you've just given grace. They've responded to you without grace. All right, now here's what it is. If you had not given grace in the first place, you might have been right here, okay, in your irritation. All right, then you give grace and you feel a little better, and then they respond to you with irritation. And where you would have been right here without grace, now you're tempted to be right here. All right, I just gave you grace, and this is how you respond to me. It is on right now. But that's not how it works. Giving grace does not equal an immediate turnaround. Giving grace is a lifelong practice that takes time. And if you're in relationships that have deep-rooted bitterness, it has to be applied for a long time. You know, I minister to so many relationships, marriages, families, whose hurts are so long and deep. And any little thing can set off the bitterness. You know, there's times where I might be counseling a couple or I'm sitting with parents and their kids, and I lose track of even what we're talking about now. Because we have gone on so many tangents of hurt and woundedness. And nobody even knows how this conversation began with how can we love each other more, and now we're talking about who forgot to take out the garbage 3 years ago, and that brought mice into the house, and you didn't do anything about it, whatever. All right, and we don't even know what we're doing anymore. And I sit in so many of these conversations, and people sometimes literally believe that if we can just get to the root of who did it first, we'll solve this whole thing. And that is not how it works. You're never going to find out who was the first culprit. The only solution to solving these relationships is to go, I'm just going to forgive. I'm just from this moment on going to give grace to this person. You know, we need this in our relationships. Now again, we go back to the fact that we could not have a relationship with God if he did not give us grace. There was no way for us to exist with him without grace. There's no way for us to exist with one another without giving grace. You know, and here's the thing. I feel like I've enjoyed a lot of grace from you guys. All right, because I know I say dumb things up here. You know, if I go off script, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I write this stuff down, and to my best of my ability, I try to be fair and godly and spiritual, and then I get mad sometimes when I'm up here. And then who knows what's going to come out of my mouth at that point, okay? And I feel like you guys offer me a lot of grace. There would be no way for me to do this week in and week out if you didn't forgive me. Otherwise, you would grow to hate me because I'm not going to stop making mistakes. Like, the stupidity is always going to be there within me coming out of my mouth for you guys on Sunday mornings. So it's going to require grace from you guys, but every one of our relationships will require it. Here's what I would ask you guys to do for today, okay? Choose the relationship where you're going to spend the most time today, okay? And I want you to practice giving grace today. All right? Like for example, let me give you an example. If you were with your loved one, okay, and let's say that you chose 3 things that you admire about them most in your relationship. All right, just think for a moment. And then just throughout the day, in some way or manner, you talked about those 3 things that you love about them, okay? Especially if you did it like if you're with a group of people and you're talking, and in the midst of the conversation, you go, if I were to go, oh, you know, it's funny. That's what I love about Megan, because she's so, she does this, and then she does this. She's always been so good. I've learned so much from her about that. You know what I mean? You put stuff like that in the relationship. Now, don't do what my kids do at dinner. When we tell them no more sarcasm, you got to say 3 nice things. Then they go, I like your hair, I like your shirt, and you tie your shoes well, okay? If it comes out as a list like that, it's going to be very transparent. So don't be, stupid about this. But just in the course of the day, say 3 things that you admire about the person that you're in a relationship with, all right? Now listen, I'm telling you all to do this, and now you're all expecting it. It is a little transparent already. It probably doesn't even matter though, because here's the thing. Once you do it, the person who you're with is going to be like, oh, huh. And then whatever thing was annoying them about you has just like gone out of their minds. All right, and they feel like you're starting to ratchet down the aggression a little bit. And if you talk about them well in front of other people, something begins to happen. We start to feel differently about one another. It's the weirdest thing. We can even know it's coming. If I said at the beginning of the day today, I'm going to say 3 nice things about you, Carlos, all right? I'm doing this on purpose. All right, this isn't going to be spontaneous. I'm doing it on purpose. So Carlos is like, oh, okay, well, that's, pretty artificial, but great. If I did it like, Carlos, you are one of the most powerful song leaders in the 30 years that I've been around. Like the way that you command this podium and the way that you are in front of the people, everyone, when you're up here, everyone's with you. I just say 3 things like that throughout the day. It doesn't matter if it's artificial. Carlos, first of all, he's going to go, I am awesome. I knew it. I suspected it, but now I know it. There's proof. But it's weird. He starts to feel differently about me as well. He starts to feel a little bit differently about me as well. And that is the beauty of showing favor to one another. That is the beauty of being intentional about it. As we leave today, there's going to be so many opportunities to annoy one another. There's so many opportunities to annoy one another. All right, like we're going to be picking up chairs and running into each other. And, the guys, they start bringing the tables in. And sometimes you don't notice them. And they're waiting for you to move. And they say, excuse me. Hey, excuse me. I've got a table. I know that you're fellowshipping and having fun, but I'm working here. Excuse me. All right, that's a moment to be irritated. No. That's a moment to show favor and to change the dynamic of things. And do this consistently throughout the week, and your entire week is different. There's no question about it. There's absolutely I'm not saying it fixes everything. That's not what I'm saying. But your week is different if you do it every week. If you do it for a few months, here's the thing. Not only is it different, but now it's a habit. Now it starts to become a part of your dynamic. All right? Keep doing it over a year, and you literally change the way that you think about somebody else. You will change the way that they think about you. All right? And this isn't fake. All right? This isn't being fake. It's the power of honor and grace within cherished relationships. Grace given over time begins to disarm and nullify bitterness. And here's the thing, you can't wait until you feel it to say it. Like that's the way of children. All right, children do what they do on impulse. What mature spiritual adults do is they live a life of self-denial. And there's nothing fake about that. That is intentional spiritual discipline applied to other people. All right, and when you are giving, when you say things, even if you don't feel them, like, honey, I just love you so much, and you may not feel that right now. But you know what's interesting? You may not feel that, but it's true. It doesn't mean it's not true. All the feelings that you had for this, let's take marriage for a second. All the feelings that you had for that person on your second date, they're still there. That person is still there. You are still you. That stuff is still inside of you. All of that is there. So saying it is just stating the truth. All right, but it's a discipline that we have to take up. Grace given over time begins to disarm and nullify bitterness. Receiving grace from someone can be life-saving. Getting grace from somebody else, it can just lift burdens. Like, we need to get grace from other people. But here's the thing. Giving grace forms you. The giving of grace is the thing that we do that makes us into the likeness of God. This is what God does to be in relationship with us. Us consistently giving grace is what actually changes us. This is the thing that forms us spiritually. It's this habit of giving grace over time that powerfully forms us into something much stronger and much more faithful. All relationships change us, of course. Yet our need to sustain close relationships through us giving grace is a part of God's plan. It's part of his plan in us becoming more than what we currently are. Jesus becomes more, we become less when we give grace to others in our most cherished relationships. Amen. Thank you very much.